Hi, this is Martin Fisher with the Southern Fried Security Podcast. I don't normally go out for drinks with other podcasters after work and watch people's organs get harvested, but when I do, it's with the guys from Defensive Security. So, guys, if you see my wife, tell her I love her.
How many nation states are you spying for, asshole? Sorry, I said that wrong. How many nation states are you spying for, asshole?
All right, so you wanna do a podcast in your weakened, sickened state?
Well, it's not what I want to do; it's what I have to do.
All right, here we go. Today is November 24th, 2014, and this is episode 94 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Jerry, and I apologize in advance if my voice breaks a little. I caught Ebola or swine flu or both or something from my girlfriend, so I'm a little under the weather tonight.
Well, I mean, if you got to catch it from someone, well, whatever.
Yeah, well, the rough part was she'd been sick for like 2 weeks, and I was like, yeah, I missed it. Great. And she was finally getting better. And just as she was like on the upswing and almost over it is when I somehow caught it. So,
but at least she's better now to take care of you. So
that's true.
So there's that.
That's a good point. So,
how
are you, sir?
I'm great. I actually, for those following the trials and tribulations of my hand, I actually went and lifted weights in PT. So that was awesome.
It didn't fall off?
Did not fall off.
Excellent.
They although everybody had their cell phone cams out just in case. Oh boy. Anyway, we should probably do news now. I'm thinking.
Yeah, we've already wasted enough time, and nobody really cares about us.
Nope.
They just care about, the news.
Totally.
And we have news.
That's right, we do. We do. So before I do that, though, the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast are ours and do not reflect those of our employers, past, present, or future. So, moving into our first story, this one comes from RT, and the title is Hacker Seized Database from City of Detroit Demanded $800,000 in Bitcoin. There's really not any good context behind how this actually came to be, but it was interesting that Detroit, which is a city who is going through bankruptcy, was socked with a, I don't think they actually say which variant they were hit with, but some kind of ransomware encrypted a database. But apparently the database wasn't actually needed. I'm guessing because they got rid of that department or something.
Yeah, that database covered city services that just weren't going to be provided anymore.
Yeah, we got rid of the police. We don't need that anymore. So yeah, they didn't pay. They didn't pay for the ransom, which was 2,000 bitcoins. Although, interestingly, we don't have that story in here. I did read in the past week there was a sheriff department here in the U.S. somewhere that did, in fact, end up paying some bitcoins to retrieve their encrypted case files, which I think is the third or fourth time I remember hearing about that in the past 2 years. So it is, it is quite a thing, and I think it's a good reminder that you gotta have a good backup plan.
Yeah, I was actually really entertained too by, I'm quoting here, so the mayor of this particular city, right, quote, "It was pretty disturbing what I found," end quote, the mayor said with respect to the type of technology the city currently relies on. Quote, "I found the Microsoft Office system we had was about 10 years old and couldn't sync the calendar to my phone," end quote. That's what you're concerned about, sir. It's the ability to sync the calendar to your phone. That's how you measure state of technology.
Well, but in defense, right? In his defense, that is the perception, right? That's how people interface with technology. That's the face of it. So
that's some fine leadership right there. The other thing that we've talked about before is the economics of what the ransom asked for is, and I'm, $803,000 I think is really excessive, and typically when we see an individual or a small company, whatever, it's like $500, which is something that most folks can go, all right, fine, here, $500, right? You go to 800,000, you're going to make everybody go, let's find any other thing we can possibly do.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and actually something that has me wondering if this was not necessarily targeted, right, but in some way tailored to that organization, because I've never heard of a ransomware attack looking for 2,000 Bitcoins.
Maybe it was a typo. Maybe they meant 2.
Could be.
I mean, it's Detroit. What were they expecting?
I don't know. Maybe they thought it was in France or something. I don't know.
The other thing I found highly entertaining, by the way, was that, also quoting from the article, unfortunately for the city attacks aren't isolated either. The Michigan state government suffers around 500,000 computer attacks every day.
Wow. That's a lot of attacks.
What are those, firewall drops?
I can only assume it's port scans and spam emails.
It hurts the brain. It would be better if they sort of equated it to, we investigate X number of incidents per, time value.
Yeah, but if it was like 4, everybody would be like, oh, whatever. That's why they show 500,000, because they probably don't investigate any.
Well, they had to justify that budget, right?
That's right.
So, did you just pick a story because we're originally from the Detroit area and you wanted to pick on Detroit?
Absolutely.
Alrighty.
Absolutely. And I thought it was interesting to see somebody crypto-lockered without a backup and not paying the ransom.
Yeah, I guess they chose the wrong database. Just pure luck on that one.
Yeah. Yep. All right, so our next story comes from Data Breach Today.
One last thought on that. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Why do they only grab one database? Right? I'm wondering, how did that work out? Was that the only box they broke? I mean, why wouldn't they have gone for more?
Well, I did wonder a little bit about that in the progression or the procession of most of these CryptoLocker attacks or CryptoLocker style attacks is they originate on your workstation. You open a you open a funnycats.exe or install a codec or whatever, and it encrypts whatever is accessible to it. So my guess is that it happened on the workstation of some city employee who had a mapped drive, or maybe that database was on their computer. I don't know. I highly doubt it was somebody actually having a presence on their network. But I could be wrong.
Fair enough.
Could be wrong. All right, so again, moving on to our next story. It comes from Data Breach Today. The title is FDIC, What to Expect in New Guidance. So, I've often said that the banking industry, I think, is one of the more mature areas of, dare I say it, cybersecurity. There aren't an incredible number of successful attacks on banks. There's some notable ones for sure, like J.P. Morgan. But the question becomes, are those attacks on parts of their businesses that are regulated and whatnot? Because generally, even a bank isn't necessarily monolithic. There can be different parts, and kind of like with PCI, a lot of times they'll try to segregate them into different areas and focus regulation on one particular area. But that's neither here nor there. This story is about the FDIC continuing to crank down on regulation, and I think this is in my mind, a good benchmark to take a look at. I'm not saying that we should run out and embrace what the FDIC is pushing here, but it's a good thing to take a look at because they are kind of out there sometimes in the front. So their new guidance is going to address, and by the way, the guidance isn't out yet, and nobody really knows for sure when it's going to be released. But they are saying there are 5 key areas that are going to be addressed, and the first is risk management and oversight, which is includes C-level employee risk awareness of emerging cyber threats. So think security awareness training. threat intelligence and information sharing.
I want to circle back on that one.
Yeah, I do too. Cybersecurity controls such as network intrusion detection systems, dependency management of third-party service providers. We've seen that be a problem a couple times this year. And then management resilience, which includes disaster recovery and business continuity planning in the wake of a cyber incident. So that's kind of the meat of it there. The article goes on and talks a little bit about what will regulators do in the face of major vulnerabilities and threats like shell shock. And in the past, the FFIC and its constituent organizations like the FFIC have put out a press a statement that says, "Hey, you really ought to go do something about that." But in my experience, those tend to lag a couple days sometimes. So I think the point here is that they're trying to figure out, what do they want to be when they grow up in this space. So anyhow, go ahead and say what you wanted to say about threat intelligence.
I want to be careful with this because I just have a little bit of trouble buying into right now that threat intelligence is incredibly effective at the moment. It really feels like, I was thinking about this earlier, and I was thinking about, dig, if you will, the picture. There's a guy who's madly in love with some girl, and he's convinced that girl is his soulmate, and she must be the one. And she's not really interested back, right? But she tolerates him. But he keeps convincing himself over and over again to come back to this girl because she must be the one. She must be for him. And I feel that's going on with threat intelligence and info sharing right now. We are just convinced that somehow this must work. And in the evidence that is scant that it is working, we keep thinking, well, we just keep coming back to threat intelligence because, it just seems like it's just supposed to work. It just must work.
It feels so right.
Yeah. And I just don't see it being effectively leveraged right now. And that could be because we're in a bit of an infancy with threat intelligence. And, we're going to talk about something later, one of the other stories with, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, but the new region, malware that was found and all the
from Luxembourg, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And all the indicators are compromised, right? And how that's going to feed into threat intelligence and go out in the world. And, I can see just threat intelligence to me just feels a lot like antivirus stat files, right? You're waiting for somebody else to get caught by this, for somebody to find it, for somebody to tear it apart, take it out of the base, indicator compromises, IP addresses, whatever it is that you got in your threat intel feed, send it out to that threat intel feed, you suck it in, and then somehow magic happens. So I don't know. It seems like something that we're jumping on, and I'm not sure how effective it is yet. And I hope I'm wrong. I really hope it is working well for companies, but I've not seen it yet.
So let me tell you. I'll tell you a couple of things. So first off, we talked, I think, last week or the week before about J.P. Morgan. And J.P. Morgan ended up hacked and they lost a lot of data. And in the end, it turned out that the attack proceeded through a third-party corporate challenge site that J.P. Morgan sponsored. And the way that J.P. Morgan ultimately came to understand that they were themselves compromised was by looking for the indicators of compromise in the in that corporate challenge site. And so, basically they said, we see CNC traffic. I assume this is how it happened, right? We see CNC traffic to these few IP addresses. Let's go look on our firewall logs and see, what do we see? And Viola, we see we've got the same kind of traffic, and that spawns more forensic activity. Look, we're owned too. We didn't realize it. And I think that's probably where a lot of the value, or at least some of the value of threat intelligence, is probably going to end up being in kind of retrospective analysis. So I was talking with Bob about this particular issue, and he actually works for a bank service provider, and he was telling me that it's not uncommon for banks and the Federal Reserve or the FFIC or different law enforcement agencies to come forward and say, hey, we have, we saw something in some bank, right? And we really think that you need to go and look for these things. And those things might be, whatever, right? Domains, IPs, who knows? And, let us know what you find. And so Bob says that happens a couple times a year. But, I think that is probably the way it's going to, proceed at least for a while. Because I think, to your point, in any other respect, it's kind of treating it like antivirus, right? If you're using threat intelligence as a preventive technology, I think it's destined to failure. In my mind, where it's probably going to have the most efficacy is in what I just described. Looking at, you are communicated to by some third party, whether it's a service offering that you subscribe to, or a law enforcement agency, or your own internal forensics team. You intake that stuff, and you need to have a process to do something with it. Are you going to throw it into your SIM and look back 60 days? I think that's, in my mind, that's probably where the FDIC here is actually pointing, is that not that you have to have some big fancy threat intel service subscription. It's more that, hey, if we come to you and say, here's some scary, nasty stuff we saw somewhere else, you need to have a process to go and do something with it that's useful.
I would agree with all that. And, we also have this era of morphing and highly divergent malware, and
yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, I think I told this story before, right? That Bob had told me, and he was doing some forensics at a company, and they found a couple of workstations talking to a known command and control host, and so they took those workstations offline, and they started doing an analysis. And in the meantime, of course, they had blocked access to that. They started seeing a whole bunch of other workstations starting to talk to that same command and control host. And so they started taking them offline, and then they would give them new computers. And those new computers would start talking to that command and control host. Well, to cut to the chase, the command and control host, it was in fact a command and control host, but it was also a compromised web server that was serving ads for one of the vampire de jour movies. And so these people were going to some pop culture website that had a banner ad that was making a call out to this other site that happened to also be a command and control host. So, I think to your point, garbage in, garbage out. You have, I certainly do think that over time, attackers, especially the more sophisticated ones, are going to adapt to this reality, and they're going to figure out how to bypass this. If we become, as an industry, really, really dependent on the concept of indicators of compromise and things like that, they're going to capitalize on that, whether that's through disinformation or, there's lots of different opportunities, and they may even already be doing it, but I think we just have to be pragmatic about this.
Yeah, I agree. Anytime you have a highly effective technique, the bad guys are going to evolve to counter it. That'll never stop.
Exactly. All right, so moving on to our next story. This comes from Cobalt Strike, and I'm not including this because I'm a big fan of Cobalt Strike. I'm not saying they're bad either. However, I thought it was an interesting topic. So the title is Adversary Simulation Becomes a Thing. And what this article goes, which is a little bit long, goes on to describe is what they call adversary simulation, and they are very careful to delineate that or distinguish that from penetration testing and even from red teaming. And it sounds like a really interesting technique. And I would say it's probably more apropos in some of the more mature organizations. Certainly you wouldn't want to do it in at least I don't think, in a very immature organization, because it would be distracting and probably not be terribly useful. However, some of the things I really liked about it is some of the pragmatism around the initial attack. So one of the key elements of this is that you are trying to identify and react to the adversary in your systems and in your network. You're not trying to keep them out initially. The starting assumption is that they're already there. Doesn't matter how they got there. Because let's kind of play it out in your mind, right? If you set up a really great InfoSec program today, well, they could have been there for the last 3 years. So you just don't know, and so I thought that was a very good approach. They have a couple of really good videos from conferences that are related. Let's see, what other big things. So I think this is something that's really worthwhile. They do point out that in relation to red teaming can often be very, very expensive. Because it's a kind of a full-on attack, whereas the threat simulation can be relatively inexpensive, depending on how you do it. And the other interesting distinction they throw out between red teaming and threat simulation is that on the red teaming, as they say it, the attackers proceed using what they know how to do. So your pen tester, I'm using pen tester and loosely there, right? The red teamer is getting into your network using techniques they know how to do, whereas the threat simulation operator, as they call it, are using techniques that they know certain threat actors use. So it's kind of an interesting thing. I think the only downside I see to it, and I say this quite a lot, and I take some heat for it, I think there's some peril in getting too focused on particular threat actors, and their particular capabilities, for the same reason that we just talked about. If you think that it's China attacking you, but it's really Russia pretending to be China, you may really miss some important elements there. So anyhow, what did you think?
Yeah, I really love the concept, and it's something that we've talked about a lot. And one thing that I saw as something sort of key to this as well is that you're really trying to simulate the behavior of known previous aggression, right? So what did previous known attacks look like? And you're trying to simulate that. And you're trying to throw it against your real world and really trying to duplicate and simulate as best you can a real attacker. And it reminded me a little bit of, if you look at the U.S. military, for instance, the Air Force has aggressor squadrons that fly dissimilar aircraft and fly in techniques that emulate what a known aggressor state would probably utilize, so that they can train our pilots against, this is likely what X bad guy country pilot is going to fly like, right? So they've seen it before. So it reminded me of that a lot. I really like the concept of being able to war game this stuff out and simulate it, and then do lessons learned and find out where your holes are, see what's being missed. The challenges here, I think that whoever's conducting this sort of adversary simulation has to be really, really, really talented. They really got to know what they're doing, and be a senior pen tester with tons of experience who can actually go well beyond just pen testing into setting up scenarios and executing scenarios, and you're almost kind of role playing this stuff out and doing a little sort of simulation, but on production. The other thing that that they recommend is using live malware, and I really am cautious about that. They say, well, just make sure that you audit it first. I don't. I guess if you can completely audit that code and make sure there's no backdoors and you can't lose control of it, I guess that's okay. I don't know that I buy that, right? I would be very, very, very cautious about using live malware. That just seems like something that is just asking for trouble and can come up and bite you in the ass. But the flip side of that is the bad guys aren't going to hesitate to use live malware.
That's right.
Right? But it's a lot harder for you to defend yourself when you just let it escape and cause bad things, and you're supposed to be a good guy. So, I think it's pretty cool. And from the article as well, it seems that this is sort of an emerging thought process and an emerging technique that isn't fully developed yet, and it's something that we can keep an eye on. But I really like it. The other thing I'll say is that, once again, this takes enough slack in your staff that you've got the cycles to go do this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they've got the cycles to respond to it, which is, again, a big challenge for a lot of companies, is to have that much bandwidth available.
Right.
So I liked it. I thought it was pretty cool.
Good. I encourage everybody to give it a read. Of course, at the bottom of the article, it is, after all, a company's blog, so they do push their product, which apparently is intended to help facilitate these adversary simulations. But anyway, I really don't have a lot of experience with Cobalt Strike. So our final story for tonight is, of course, the thing called Regin or however we want to pronounce it. And this is the result of a Symantec investigation, apparently. And they are calling it a top-tier espionage tool that enables stealthy surveillance. And it has been, I'll say, cavalierly compared to the likes of Stuxnet and Dooku and Flame and all of those other, quote, highly sophisticated pieces of malware in the past. And apparently this has been out and about since sometime in 2008 and went dark in 2011 and has been seen again since 2013. What's interesting about this is that it's a multi-step infection process, and so the dropper is unencrypted and it pulls down another piece of code, which I would call an intermediary dropper, which is encrypted, and you need that initial dropper to decrypt it, and then it kind of so it goes. That second piece of code pulls down another piece of encrypted code, which only it can decrypt, and so on. So the problem there is that you have to have the whole spectrum of malware in order to be able to analyze the whole thing, which really makes it very challenging if you get a system that's not completely doesn't have all the components there. So that's I've seen that be a problem in forensic analysis of infected systems before. But the thing that concerns me a lot here is with Stuxnet and Dooku, and this is like drawing a great roadmap for how to package the next version of CryptoLocker. But I think the other
that's your biggest concern is CryptoLocker. That's it.
No. Criminal just the garden variety criminals taking these tactics and turning them into really easy to use toolkits that. Now we start seeing all sorts of these things, and they're no longer very sophisticated. So anyhow, the other interesting aspect of this is the audience of who actually was targeted
that we know of.
Right? So
and that's a huge caveat there.
Oh, absolutely. So. Given what's known or what's being reported, 48% of those found to be infected were private individuals and small businesses. 28% were telecom and backbone providers, 9% hospitality, 5% energy, 5% airline, 5% research. And separately, just before the show started, we found an article that is claiming what I'll say is a tenuous link to the Belgacom compromise that was attributed to the NSA and GCHQ. And apparently somebody familiar with that whole episode has said that, this piece of malware here is what was found, or at least partly what was found in the cleanup at Belgacom. So that, in the article I read, that they were trying to draw a pretty clear linkage between Regin and the NSA and GCHQ. So that's, to me, seems a little tenuous at this point, but hey, somebody wrote it.
Yeah, clearly. The one thing that I have trouble with buying into is taking any sort of, I guess, conclusion away from who's they found to be compromised. Because one thing it states very clearly is that the infection vector is highly varied, and that there was no reproducible vector found at the time of writing. So, as again, payload is separated from exploit, and ultimately, this could have been widely spread or selectively spread with the idea that it may continue to spread to a certain target. We saw that a bit with Stuxnet. It kind of got out of control. I don't know if that was intentional or not. Some recent findings of Stuxnet showed that it was seeded at 5 key spots first to get into, in theory, Iranian nuclear control facilities. But so, it's tough to know, right? Just because 48% were individual and small businesses, that may or may not have anything to do with the goal of that particular, payload. There's a lot to that. I read through this. I read through the PDF they published. I've been doing a little of the research. There's some interesting stuff out there on this, and just kind of quickly run down my notes because I don't want to completely dominate, but back to the infection vector. Obviously, they're saying that the infection vector is highly varied. So this again goes to, if you're only attacking a vector as your way of stopping malware, like you assume that all malware is going to come from phishing, that's not always a good thought process. You need to keep in mind that these things can come in a whole lot of different ways, and the same family of whatever it is can come in through all sorts of different exploits. And then once you get a dropper in there, it doesn't matter how it got there. You now can download whatever it is you really want to get into the organization. So, I'd be careful about focusing too much on the vector. From the beginning, they're assuming this is a nation state, or they make the conjecture that it is, based on what it appears to be going after. It may or may not be, but I'm not sure why, based on the sophistication, we automatically have to assume it's a nation state. That's a really good point. Every time one of these things comes out, we read something to the effect of, it's so sophisticated, it would have taken nation state level funding and years of development effort. And what was interesting, and I'm not passing judgment one way or another, but Dave Aitel this morning sent out an email on his Daily Dave distribution list, saying, I don't know what all the fuss is about. We sell a product that effectively does the same thing. It's clearly, it's advanced, but it's clearly not that advanced that it's out of the hands of, out of the reach of non-nation states. And I think that, whatever you want to say about Dave Aitel and his company, I think that's probably true, and I think that's a really important lesson, or that's an important point that we should not really lose track of, that these are not necessarily all coming from nation states. Now, maybe they are. Maybe there's things we're not privy to, but I think just saying that by virtue of its sophistication, it's the NSA, that seems kind of ridiculous. Yeah, I would agree. There's plenty of very well-funded, highly motivated criminal organizations that I think could probably have done this, depending on what they're going after, right? So we come back to intent. I will say that the feel of this feels like surveillance and espionage type activity, so that may lend itself back to a nation state. But I wouldn't say based on the sophistication of the code that we automatically go there. One thing I was reading too was some of the command and control. One of them was ICMP. Payload information could be encoded and embedded in lieu of legitimate ICMP ping data. The string shit is scattered in the packet for data validation. In addition, CRC checks use a seed 31337, which is, in essence, hacker speak for elite. Now, those could be misdirections, right? Those could be, if I'm a government-run Intel org, I may throw those in there to make it look like script kiddies are involved. Well, not script kiddies, but, hackers and, immature juveniles. But at the same time, that could be realistically showing that it was just some random hacker folkin who threw this together. So I don't know.
Absolutely. And you know what? Something that's bothered me for a long time when I read the dissection reports about these pieces of malware, and it's not always the state-sponsored ones, but it seems like a lot of times there's what I would describe as a unrealistic placement of trust on the things that are found within the malware that they're analyzing. Yeah. And so things like compile dates. I've never seen any one of those reports question the compile date, and I don't understand why. That baffles me. If I were a bad person and I were writing some malware, I'd change my compiled, the date on my computer to be something else.
Dude, you're revealing state level secrets.
I know. I'm going to jail now. I'd be including quotes from Nordic literature, or whatever, to throw people off the trail. So, I'm not that smart. I'm not that clever. I can't not imagine that people are writing malware to this level of sophistication are not also having those thoughts. And that's just my.
So a couple other thoughts I had. This could have been out there in theory for update years. However, let me be very clear. Symantec has a lot of sketchy information here, and I'm not saying sketchy that they have limited gaps in their knowledge about this, and they admit this readily. They say, we've only seen this, we've seen this, we think there's more out there. They do not have their arms around this entirely. So there's speculation that this has been out since 2008, that there was a version 1 that got yanked out of circulation and a version 2 got pushed out there. Let's go with the fact that this has been out there let's cut the difference and say 4 years. We missed this for 4 years? Symantec says they started researching this in the fall of 2013. So they've been working on it for a year before they went public? Now, I'm not saying that they're doing anything wrong. I'm saying it took them that long to assemble enough information. So this goes back to, yet again, we are failing at detection.
Yeah, absolutely. And, clearly the answer is that we need more antivirus.
Right. The other thing I found interesting was that this was looking for things like flight plans and hotel reservations.
Yeah, and even allegedly, as far as I can tell, it has something to do with scheduling like kidnappings for organ harvesting.
Well, yeah, especially in Southeast Asia.
That's crazy.
You wake up in the pool of ice, missing kidney.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But, that's pure just rumor mill. We can't substantiate that at the moment.
That's true.
So, just take that with a grain of salt. But so I just find it interesting, and I also I don't know. Something about this feels a little off still, and maybe it's because we have such limited information out of Symantec. But I don't know. Do you think this could be just a press grab by Symantec?
I think a lot of these obviously are, they're clearly intended and spaced out in such a way, working at a large company, I have a very, very hard time imagining that, keeping your name out there is not part of it. I mean, think about it. Why would a company like Symantec invest the amount of effort that they want to, in this analysis? It's to establish thought leadership, right? So,
Sure.
Of course they've got motivation there, whether or not it's, I guess the level to which it's selfish or self-centered is unknown. But I think Symantec in general is relatively good. There are some others that are a little more dodgy, but I don't know. It is interesting that they did wait a year to report it. There were some jokes going on Twitter earlier today about responsible disclosure of this report. So, but anyhow, it's an interesting question that I certainly don't know the answer to.
Yeah, to be continued. It's obviously big news. It's hell, it ended up on Skin and Money. They were freaking out over it. It's very much within the realm of possibility and likely that we do have a number of nation states conducting espionage activities with malware. It makes perfect sense to me. It's a perfect avenue for doing that sort of stuff. Clearly, we suck at detecting it and stopping it.
Yep, absolutely. And this is a very, very difficult thing to defend against. And we've talked about this a lot in the past. And when you are up against more advanced adversaries, it becomes really difficult because they've got a plethora of avenues in, right? And you're not necessarily aware of all of them. So one of the I guess bits of innuendo is not really even an assertion, right? But when they were talking about the propagation mechanism, they were saying that it appears like quite possibly one of the computers they analyzed was infected through an unknown vulnerability in Yahoo Instant Messenger.
Who uses Yahoo Instant Messenger anymore?
Well, I guess one of these people. But so I think that's one of the challenges is that if you've got an adversary that has capabilities to exploit things that you just can't conceive of being exploited, and even if you think you're doing good practices, it's it's potentially problematic. And it kind of goes back to the point of trying to plan for failure, but even that can only go so far because a lot of if it is the NSA or GCHQ, right? And they can't get you to click on the link. Well, maybe they'll stop you at the border, or
yeah, they'll find a way.
They'll find a way, right?
The only advice I have is they obviously had a number of very clever CNC channels to use. I think that's the only real shot we've got at detection is watching those channels for anomalous behavior, which I'm not saying is simple at all, but it's where I'd probably spend my time if I'm trying to counter this.
Yeah,
or go for a straight, full whitelisting lockdown on the endpoints, which can be culturally difficult for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, and also, some people will be happy to point out not 100% effective either, but
no, you're just raising the bar,
right?
You're just making it that much. Nothing's 100%,
right?
But we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of good enough.
Absolutely.
So I don't know. I'm still stunned by the fact if this is that widespread, nobody stumbled upon this ever until Symantec somehow did.
That is an interesting bit of information. Absolutely.
So hopefully more info will come out.
Yep. So I guess there were two other little bits of developing news today. Craigslist apparently had their DNS hijacked for quite a long time. I don't know exactly how long. It seemed like it was several hours at least, but that kind of goes back to some problems we've talked about in the past. DNS is a weak spot for a lot of companies.
It is, and if you've got long time to live on those records, even when you get a control back, they could be cashed out in the world for a long time.
That's right. That's right.
It's one spot I think we need to spend more time watching.
That's right. And then the other is apparently Sony Motion Pictures was also compromised. Although the details there are very sketchy. It sounds like they had a server compromise, but it sounds like they've taken their California network offline.
Yeah, this came up on a Reddit post, and this is a lot of. Apparently, they've confirmed they're looking into an IT issue. Is all they've really confirmed. So I'm going to put this in the rumor mill camp at the moment. However, I am entertained because you may or may not remember. Way back in the day when we bought CDs, Sony was trying to combat piracy of their CDs. And one of the ways they did it was they were quietly and without permission installing rootkits on people's boxes when they put the CD in their CD drives to rip the music into whatever music player they were using. And when... obviously, this is Sony, Motion Pictures versus Sony proper, Sony Entertainment. But when confronted about it, one of the VPs out of Japan said, "Who cares? Nobody knows what a rootkit is anyway."
Oh, boy.
I need to go back and find that quote. This was probably 10 years ago.
I saw somebody posted a picture of a T-shirt that had that quote on just a little bit ago. I'll have to go back and find it.
So, there's a little bit of, kind of poetic justice there, I think.
Indeed. Well, I think that exhausts our abundance of stories for this evening. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. And thank you to everyone who is listening. We definitely appreciate you spending time with us each week. And as a reminder, if you like what you hear, give us a good rating on iTunes. It gives us some internet points. We can go, we can't really spend it anywhere, but hey, it's still internet points. You can find the show on the internet at www.defensivesecurity.org, where you can find back episodes, the links to our stories, and other stuff like that. You can find the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can find Mr. Kellett on Twitter at Lurg, and you can find me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And with that, we will bid you adieu for another week. Have a great one, and to those in the U.S., happy Thanksgiving.
Take care, everyone. See you next week.
Bye. So yeah, that whole thing about the organ harvesting, that was actually to get Mr. Kellett some free beers from our friend Martin Fisher.
We are bad people.
We're bad.
But, we do silly things for beers.
That's right. It's beer. I mean, what can you do?
We're not really that dumb.
No.
I mean, it's beer.
And you should know that we're not that dumb because you listen to our podcast every week. Or wait. No.
It could happen. There could maybe. No, it really couldn't.
No, probably not.
No. Anyway.
It sucks having Ebola and the swine flu at the same time.
We're big in Togo. We are the biggest IT security podcast in Togo.